Alright, yo, I think we can all agree that Paul George has become one of the most underrated stars in the NBA. It all started in 2010 when Paul George was drafted 10th overall by the Indiana Pacers. In the first few seasons he was there, he didn't get much playing time and really didn't do much, being on the bench behind Danny Granger. But in 2013, Paul George broke out, won Most Improved Player of the Year, and averaged 17 points per game. After that, Paul George would lead the Indiana Pacers to lots of successful playoff runs, and in 2014 even got to the Eastern Conference Finals, but then lost to LeBron's Heat. After Paul George's injury in the Olympics, it was basically over for the Pacers, and for 2 seasons, Paul George fought hard to get back into the playoff race, but he would get knocked out in the first round each time. So in the summer of 2017, Paul George was traded to the Oklahoma City Thunder. In his first season, he averaged 21 points per game, but in his second season with the Thunder in 2018-19 is where he really turned it up and averaged 28 points per game, being an MVP candidate, but then he left the next season because of Russ.
Lillard, long-range three, and it's good at the buzzer!
Yeah. So then in the 2019 offseason, Paul George signed with the Los Angeles Clippers. George was injured most of his first season in LA, and when he did play, he was averaging 21 points, 5 rebounds, and 4 assists per night. And then in March, the NBA season came to a stop because of COVID. But the Los Angeles Clippers were one of 22 teams invited back to the NBA bubble in July. And let's just say Paul George did not play well. In the playoffs versus the Dallas Mavericks and Denver Nuggets, he was a huge reason why they lost. And, I mean, Paul George was dealing with depression, so you got to give him a break there. But whatever you want to call him, way off P, playoff P, pandemic P, he was playing horrible in the playoffs. And the Clippers had a 3-1 lead on the Denver Nuggets in the second round. But then Paul George played horrible in the last 3 games of the series, and the LA Clippers lost in 7 games. In the 2020 offseason, Paul George signed a mega 5-year, $226 million contract with the Los Angeles Clippers. And PG-13 was about to prove that he earned it too. This past season, George averaged 23 points, 6 rebounds, and 5 assists per contest. George found his touch again and was nominated as an NBA All-Star. George and the Clippers went on a run in the late season and eventually got the 4 seed in the Western Conference. PG and the Clippers didn't want to play LeBron James and the Lakers in the first round, so they avoided them by tanking the last 2 games of the season. PG-13 and the Clippers faced the Dallas Mavericks in the first round of the playoffs, the team that PG and the Clippers had faced the year earlier. But this time it was a different story because Luka Doncic was putting up buckets and it looked like it was going to be playoff P all over again. But then in Game 3, Paul George shocked the world and put up 29 points, 7 boards, and 4 assists on the night to win the game 118-108 to get back in the series. From then on, it was smooth sailing as Paul George had incredible game after game, putting up more than 25 points regularly every single night in the series. The Clippers won Game 4 and were getting some momentum. And in Game 5, Paul George led the Clippers to an easy win to put them in the driver's seat. Doncic and the Mavs fought back in Game 6 to tie the series at 3. And then came PG-13's amazing Game 7 performance with 22 points to lead the Los Angeles Clippers to a first round win. PG and the Clippers then faced the Utah Jazz and were down 2-0 in the series, and Kawhi Leonard even got injured in Game 3. But this time it was PG's turn to shine, and he and the Clippers won 4 straight games to win the series in 6 after incredible game after incredible game from PG's display of amazing activity on the court. The Clips eventually lost to the Phoenix Suns in the Western Conference Conference Finals in 6 games, but Paul George and the Clippers held their own on that stage, even without Kawhi Leonard, and Paul George had some pretty decent games in the series. In my opinion, Paul George deserved that $226 million contract, and Paul George led the Clippers to their first Western Conference Finals berth ever, and nobody is talking about it. So kudos to Paul George, because in my opinion, he is the most underrated man in the NBA. And to be honest, I wouldn't be surprised if Paul George had another incredible season with the LA Clippers next year. Although sadly, I think this will be Paul George's last prime year, and he needs to savor it all he can, because now he's going to be in more of a Kyle Lowry role that he needs to fill. Anyway, thank you guys for watching. Click subscribe, turn notifications on, like, share, comment, all the good stuff, and as always, I'm your boy, Hyper Basketball, and we're out.